Hello, my name is Devin Easterlin, and I'm CEO of SJA Property Management. And today I'm joined by Derek Bunyard, who is president of SJA Property Management. And we're going to be talking a little about some summer trends and what you can do as a landlord, as an investor to get prepared for these months. Some best practices that we found. So Derek, how are you doing?
Doing great. Looking forward to joining the pod.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's just kick it off by going over a couple things that I'd like to discuss today. And one of those is making sure that you're in the best possible position to maximize your revenue going into these months. Also, I'd like to discuss a little bit about how you ensure that your rental is ready to attract the best possible tenants and reduce that vacancy rate. As we know, vacancy rate is the number one driver of investments performance. So some things that we do here at the company and what investors and self-managers can do to help in that regard as well. We can go over a few summer trends that we're seeing in terms of rents and what the markets are doing in the various areas that we operate in. And then just kind of wrap up with some best practices. How's that sound?
That sounds great. Let's dive into it.
All right, sounds good. So first, just trying to think about the basic areas that we're operating in, and that's primarily Seattle, King County, a little bit of Snohomish County. What are you seeing in terms of market demand in those key cities, say Kirkland, Seattle, things like that? How is the market doing overall for rentals?
Yeah, great question. I actually was chatting with some of our realtors, our network, and on the sales side, it's a mixed reaction. Some are thriving. In fact, I was talking to one agent who had a listing up in the Kirkland area that generated over 21 offers. The classic bidding war that we saw in the early 21, 22 timelines. And we've seen a little bit on the other side for less desirable areas where days on market are stacking up. And what's interesting is we cross over to the rental side that we're seeing a little bit of both similarities there, right? We're seeing some things go right away in highly desirable areas like Kirkland, Bellevue, Redmond, East Side, and some of the Seattle markets. And then we're seeing some other things where there's a lot of competition or requiring some adjustments that maybe we haven't had to take into consideration in recent years. So there is a little bit of strategies that has to be deployed in terms of how you're going about marketing properties and filling the vacancies up. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some people may hear, that nationwide rents may be down, or they may hear overall that rents are lower. You're not able to get as much as you used to get in our area. And I think it's really area specific. So what I've noticed is if you are in one of those hot cities, hot school districts, those rents are really still increasing pretty rapidly. Overall, we're seeing about a 1.9% increase in Seattle area year over year. But in those really desirable areas with high demand, that can be a lot more than that. I've also noticed that when we're bringing on property, people that are self-managing or whatever it is, they're typically charging less than market. Maybe they're just not sure exactly how to get market and worried that their vacancy is going to stack up. But there still are some ways that you can effectively reduce vacancy, right? Also making sure you're not leaving money on the table as well, especially if you find yourself in a higher, more desirable neighborhood or area for sure. Great. So just want to move on to rental pricing and how you think about rental pricing. So that's a big hot topic is, should I put my property on at the highest possible amount I think I can get, or should we start, much lower to create demand? How do you think about that in terms of from a best practices standpoint?
Yeah, great question. I think once you move out of the location and the desirable traits that the location offers, you got to look at the property itself and what is the overall condition. So when we talk with our clients or prospects, we want them to understand what their options are in terms of here's a range, for instance, in terms of what the current condition is, or what some adjustments or some improvements to the overall property would offer in terms of return on value. So you can think of that in terms of forced appreciation if there's some big capex improvements, or if there is just some light renovations that would help rent the property faster. As you said, days on market, vacancy, those are going to have a direct correlation to the revenue. And really, this time of the year is the ideal time to be taking advantage of how you can maximize the revenue on your asset.
Yeah, I think you can have a few more, warts on the property this time of year because of the higher demand. One thing that we've noticed historically is that one of the bigger complaints that we get from people that are transferring from other management companies is that they put my property on the market, and then a couple of months later, they called me up and said it's not renting, and now we need to do a price adjustment. Well, at that point, you're already down 16% of the revenue you were going to receive that year. So you're already way behind the 8 ball, and I can understand that frustration. I think the best tactic to take, whether you're doing this on your own or using a property management company, is to have a plan going into it. So I think that starts with making sure that property is really turnkey. And so we want to make sure, just a few things to be thinking about. Is it hotel clean, right? Is everything, when somebody walks into that, it just smells clean. People feel as though, wow, I can make this my home. They want to make sure everything's functioning as designed. You don't want that, where a homeowner might be okay with jiggling a toilet handle. A renter's not going to be. That shows them the care and attention that you put into this property. And that really, the best tenants, the ones that have really high credit scores and know they can rent any property, they're going to be very picky, and they're going to pick the best possible properties on the market. So even though we're in a higher demand season, I think to optimize your rent, you really have to have that really turnkey ready at that first showing, when you first bring those properties in. And then, we talked a little bit about having a plan. And what I think about with that is making sure that you're going into this saying, we don't want to lose money on the table. It's not an exact science knowing exactly what your property can rent for, because every property is a little bit different, right? You might be in the same location as other comparables, but your kitchen is renovated or your backyard has a better vista. A few things that are a little bit intangible. So a strategy that I think works well is to say, we're going to start at the higher side of the rental range. And then we're going to gauge whether we need to do price adjustments based on activity and days on market, right? So if we say, for example, we're coming in with a marketing strategy of, we're starting at $3,000, that's the very top of the market. We're going to test that for 7 days. We're going to track the activity, making sure that the property's turnkey, that it's actively marketed in all the key sites. Then we'll know if it hasn't rented in 7 days, there weren't people just looking to jump into that market and overpay. And that's when you do your price adjustment and go for that next weekend, so that you're not waiting until you've had those days on market really stack up. And you do that for about a month, following a similar feedback from the market. The market will tell you where you're priced, provided you've done everything correctly in the front. Would you agree with that type of strategy?
Absolutely. I think that strategy is key. And one of the things you touched on that comes when we talk to clients that are coming to us where they struggle to lease up their properties, or they've had roadblocks in the past. Oftentimes, it's developing the skills of identifying where that range really starts and stops. So when we say the top end of the range, our team is thoroughly trained in identifying how we map up our current properties with what the market's offering. It goes beyond the standard 3-bedroom, 2 baths, or the square footage. You have to get into the weeds and understand, hey, how does this kitchen match up to the comps that are available on the market currently? What's rented recently that we can point to when we're having conversations with tenants? Because tenants are savvy. They have this information as well. They're going to say, hey, they're going to want to negotiate if, in fact, you don't have all your bases covered. And so one thing that we like to do is educate our clients in terms of, hey, this is what that range typically looks like. And then we walk them through a plan that you just outlined, because it's important to keep the things moving along. We have to get the property leased, and we have to understand what the market's going to bear, what it's going to bear, right? So we have to accommodate accordingly. So
yeah. Absolutely. The real big takeaway here from ensuring that you're getting the most possible rent is getting that property in optimal condition. I think that's the thing that a lot of landlords miss, or management companies may miss. And they're thinking, well, I just need to get this thing on the market. But really what they're losing out on is that quality tenant and being able to drive the higher side of those ranges that we're discussing. And it can be a little bit harder, I think, for a self-manager to accurately price, because they're seeing what properties are marketed for, rather than what they actually rented for. So, for example, in our software, we can see where things actually rented. And then, of course, we have the historical knowledge to see what it rented for. Yes, it may have started at $3,000, but it actually rented, for $2,800. So that helps a little bit. But even if you are self-managing, you can just be really attuned to the market and the comps. And like I said, have a good solid plan coming into it. And you should be able to adapt that. It takes being proactive in your approach rather than reactive, for sure.
Oh, well, nice. To add to that, Devin, I think there's a downstream effect. When that property's in great condition and you can get it rented sooner, you're also generally appealing to higher quality tenants. And that's going to have an impact on you long term as we think about what the opportunities are for keeping that tenant in the property so that they're not moving out because the property itself is in good condition. Lowering your turnover costs, your vacancy rates, all the things that impact you down the road.
I think that's a really great point, because someone might be in a pinch and they might rent your property because they need to move, which often is the case, and they'll move into something that's not in very good condition just because they need to, but are they going to stay, right? And the name of the game is keeping quality tenants in your property as long as possible, right? And so the better condition you have that in, the more apt they are to stay and to love the property. We want our tenants to love the properties that they in and feel pride of being a resident of that property. They're more apt also to take really good care of the property if it's in great condition like that. So that's a really good point. Ideally, we want, on average, our tenants are staying an average of 3 years, which is much more than the industry average. And that's just, we do a few things to help with that. And it's not something that other people can't duplicate. It's being very proactive. First of all, of course, like we talked about, great condition, good quality screening. And then it's being proactive about the maintenance and making sure it stays in optimal condition, being really responsive when tenants do have issues, empathizing with their situation, understanding that it's a big deal if, say, their refrigerator is down for a little bit, doing things that you can to make sure that they feel as though they're heard, and then being very responsive and quick with your repairs. That shows that you care, and that shows that you have a good quality relationship with those residents. They're much more apt to stay longer, which is a win-win. They're happy in the home, and our landlords are happy because reduced vacancy rate and all of that. Even if you don't want to get into a cycle where a resident stays for 12 months and then moves out. There's inherent costs of turning a property. You're probably going to get about 30 days of vacancy, and that's if you're really on it and working really hard. And of course, there's turn costs associated with this that you can't. I think one of the misnomers is that tenants pay for all the turn costs and repairs and things like that, and that's just not actually true. Under the law, they have to pay for things that exceed normal wear and tear, but that's not going to cover, scuffs on walls, getting your baseboard trim looking good. It's not going to cover, really manicuring that yard, doing the things that are necessary to have that next tenant move in. A lot of that's going to be shouldered by the landlord. So you want to reduce those turns as much as possible, for sure there. Derek, I think what would be great is to go over common pitfalls that we see with people that are either self-managing or using other management company. What are some things that people are doing incorrectly and not really taking advantage of the time of year, or that's going to actually hurt them in the long run? What are you seeing from your point of view?
That's a great question, Devin. One thing that we certainly advise our clients with is the time of year we want to take advantage of when you're turning tenants over or having lease renewal opportunities. So when we think about an optimal time to have a tenant move out, it would be in the spring and summer months. You don't want to have a tenant move out around the holidays or early winter months. That ultimately is going to be a challenge for you to not only lease the property, but get in there and get it repaired and fixed. So by giving that guidance with clients, we can kind of set the stage for where we currently at in terms of the plan that they have in front of them. We'd like to break down a plan on an annual basis that we can say, hey, this is what this looks like, not only for your current tenant, if you have one, or when you are moving out, so that we can plan accordingly for getting the property prepared and ready to go to market. But then setting them up for what the proper terms are, meet their goals, and also give them some ideal timing in terms of opportunity.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is having a really good strategy for your rental, right? And making sure you're taking advantage of the seasonality of demand for sure. So when your lease end dates are falling and that type of thing. I also think it's really important, and one of the pitfalls that I see is self-managing owners not having quality communication with their residents, not staying in close contact with them, knowing what the resident is planning on doing at the end of the term, making sure that they're coming through and doing periodic evaluations of that property. Sometimes it's, well, the rent's coming in, I want to set this and forget it. The only time I start to really put attention on this rental is if rent doesn't come in. And what we've seen, over the past 16 years of doing that, that is a very dangerous game to play, because by the time rent's not coming in, there's probably a lot of problems that are going to crop up. You're probably going to get multiple months of vacancy. There's probably some maintenance issues that have gone unreported, and your relationship with that tenant is on the downhill. So I would say definitely being proactive with your management, having certain times where you're going to tour that property, go over the basics, look for any moisture issues, any leaks that may be happening in the tile or in the ceilings, stuff that could really escalate unless you get some eyes on that. And then just having really proactive communication, I think, with your resident is so important as well. What are their plans at the end of the lease? Are you going to be incurring a vacancy? Are they comfortable with a rent increase? Those type of things. I think that's another thing that we can touch on a little bit is, what is a good strategy for renewing your tenants? Say it does fall in these summer months. How do you think about that? Do you think about, hey, I should just come in at the same rate, or what's your thought process on it?
Well, I think one, we have to now take into consideration where your property is and comply with the new legislation and the law requirements. So that requires you putting your plan together sooner and being well informed in terms of what you have to do for your tenants and for the property itself. So one, there's a compliance component that has to be taken into consideration. So when we're providing notice, if in fact we're offer a renewal to the current tenant, notice for increase on what the rent would be, and then breaking it down.
We did talk about that pretty significantly. I brought Harry on, our director of operations, and we went over House Bill, what is it, 1217? Yeah. And what everything that's required with that. So it's a really great point. Everything has to start a lot sooner now with that. So you are actually having to have your plan in place a lot sooner than we used to, of what you're going to do on that renewal and how you're going to, and the amount that you can renew, the increases. It just came down, I think, just about a month ago, what the actual cap rate is. So it's going to be determined every year in Washington State, and it's 10% this year. So that's one of those things that if you miss some of those timelines, you might not be able to raise the rent like you thought you could at the timeline that you thought you could. So you got to be definitely educated on that. And I think that makes it there's a little more strategy involved with that, because if you can only do 10%, you don't want to miss a year or two of increases, because it doesn't mean that you can do 15 or 20% because you didn't increase those other years. it's always going to be a capped in that given year. So even a small increase may make sense because your property taxes are going to increase, maintenance costs. We've talked about this pretty extensively here at the company, trying to control maintenance costs, and all the vendors are charging a lot more than they used to, right? So you have a lot of costs as a landlord that you're shouldering, and you have to be able to keep rent up so that it does still a profitable investment for you, or one that you're going to want to keep.
Oftentimes what we see for investors is they think that rent has to go up in correlation to the expenses that are increasing, but those are two different things that are happening. The ability to increase rent has to be supported by what the market will support. Mm-hmm. Owners' expenses are going up. That's a reality, and that's always been the case. But now it has to be, you have to make sure that you're separating the two in terms of, while you may have a 10% cap, that is the maximum that you can offer. And what we take on is a conversation with the tenants when the time comes to be able to present what the actual rent increase is. That's supported by the comps that allow for that raise, if indeed it does. What we hear sometimes with other owners are coming to us, maybe with properties under market, is that they were just a little bit afraid to actually introduce a rate increase on the rents. And ultimately, that might stack up and compound year over year, because it's just easier just to say, hey, stick with the same rent. Meanwhile, their expenses are going up, and after a while, things are out of balance, and it's hard to play catch up with that current tenant. And that is a lost opportunity. Right? Not only for the revenue that can be generated from the asset, but also just the relationship that has been formed with the tenant. So we like to make sure that year over year, we're talking with our tenants, and we're working out a fair and reasonable rent and an increase if in fact the market supports that for their area, but also having conversations well in advance with our owners so they understand where that range really falls. And as we get closer to the offering of what the rent will be, that they have an understanding of what the market offer is. Because then it becomes down to decision time. If the tenant says no, like to the proposal, then we have to look at what the hard cost would be to turn the property over. And we touched on that briefly. So.
And one thing that the key in what you're talking is what the market will support. So that's just coming into your plan, understanding, because oftentimes your tenants are going to receive this notice for a rental increase, and what are the first thing they're going to do? I'm going to go to Zillow, see what's out there, right? And are they overcharging me, right? I think a strategy that makes a lot of sense. So here at SJA, we have an obligation to work in our owners' best interest. So that is to optimize the revenue that they're going to receive while being a client of SJA. So our owners right now, on average, are staying with us 6 years. So that's a long partnership. And we're thinking over those 6 years, how can we put the most money in their pocket as possible? And so how that pertains to a rental increase is you don't necessarily want to go all the way up to the top of the market with a good tenant that's paying rent on time, that's keeping the property in great condition. That's a poor strategy, because now you've really increased the chances that tenant's going to move out. And now you're going to have to, get all those turn costs like we talked about. You're going to get some vacancy that we talked about. And now you're putting in an unproven resident, someone that hasn't shown you that they're going to be a great resident. So if you do, as a landlord, have a great tenant in place, I think it's absolutely reasonable to do a small rental increase if the market warrants it. Right? Because like we said, it's limited now. So you have to keep up. And I think residents and tenants really understand that landlords' costs are going up. So I would definitely recommend a small increase if it's warranted, but I would shy away from trying to get top of market when you have a great resident in your property. You will actually save money by not doing that over the long term. So I think that's a better strategy, right? Again, all of this works a lot better if you're renewing in these spring and summer months like we're talking about here, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I just want to go over just a couple things that we're doing here at SJA to really make this journey for landlords a little bit easier. One of those is for all new clients that are coming on, we're having a no fee cancellation. We understand that things change in our owners' lives. circumstances change that they can't control, maybe they need to move back in for some reason, something happens where they can't rent that property out. If they need to cancel management services with us, we're going to allow them to do that and not charge them anything. So that's really unique in the industry and something that we really stand behind. We're also offering a happiness guarantee. So any client that comes on, we want to make sure they're absolutely thrilled with the service that we are providing them. And if for some reason they feel as though we're not meeting expectations, we will refund up to 3 months of the first 3 months of management fees, just to make sure that they were happy. And if they are not, we'll refund them and allow them to cancel without penalty. So that's another thing that we're doing to help landlords during this time. Lastly, we are offering a promotion right now where all new management accounts that come in, all new owners that join SJA get 25% off their onboarding and tenant placement fee. That's actually a really large savings. It's probably the biggest promotion that we do all year. So anyone looking for management services or need to looking maybe to switch from a certain management company, or they're just tired of managing it themselves and having a part-time job, I think this is a really good incentive for those people. Anyone that's interested in just learning more about how we manage property or anything that Derek and I have discussed today, feel free to reach out to us. Alana, she's our business development manager. She's really experienced and she probably brings on about 20 new accounts every month. She really knows market data. She really knows how and what is necessary to get a property in optimal condition to get that top end rent like we discussed. Feel free to reach out to us. We can set you up with a consultation, no obligation consultation with Alana. She'll go over any questions that you have and make sure you feel real comfortable, whether you decide to go with management services or not. We want to be a resource for our community here. Of course, we'd love to earn your business, but maybe it's not the perfect time right now, and that's all right. We're here to help. So thanks everybody. And thank you, Derek, for the conversation. I hope it's valuable to everyone. Really appreciate it. And until next time.
Thank you.